Here we are. It's the second Dodge Demon ownership video. I'm about to hit 1,000 miles, and it's been an exciting 1,000 first Odo ticks.
So it's like unwrapping a Christmas present.
Yeah.
I've watched the blossoming horsepower in my 6.2 liter Hemi when I put E85 in it, and it goes well past 900 horsepower, and I've watched that happen in real time.
We're moving up. Okay, so we just took a big jump.
And I've gone through my kind of OCD car break-in process where I have to constantly vary the RPM, pushing it up to the RPM you're allowed to go to, whatever threshold you're at in terms of the break-in process, 3,500, 4,500, 5,500. And of course, I'm always trying to do not overly aggressive, but semi-aggressive throttle pulls, because I have this whole thing about how you break in an engine properly, but we're gonna get to that in a second. And of course, probably the biggest news is that I swapped out the carbon fiber wheels and drag radial tires for some plain old boring street wheels and street tires that I can enjoy driving without stressing about. And we're gonna cover all that in this ownership video, but we're gonna start with the wheels and tires. Got one sitting right here. So, you know, drag radials are really cool, but they're a bit treacherous if it ever rains. And carbon fiber wheels are really cool, but if they cost over 10,000 a piece, they're treacherous whenever they leave the garage. And I'm one of those crazies that want to actually drive my Dodge Demon on a semi-regular or more basis. So I knew from the start I was going to be swapping out these drag radials for something a bit more functional and low stress on regular use on the road. I already had a leftover set of the street tire package from my 2018 Dodge Demon, which included 4 20 by 11 inch wheels and a set of Pirelli PZero 305/35 tires. I could use those on the back, but this car only has half a wide body, as we all know. So I could not put those same size wheels and tires on the front unless I wanted them to stick out far, and I had a feeling that wasn't going to look good. In fact, during the process of swapping all these tires, I tried it just for a second to see, and it didn't look good. So I knew I had to do something else besides use the Dodge Demon 2018 street tire package for the front wheels and tires on this car. And I know that Dodge has 9.5 inch wheels for narrow body Challengers. But when I looked at the 8 inch wheels, these front wheels right here that were already on the car, and I looked at how much width was left over, I thought another 1.5 inches is going to stick out too far on the front of this car. And I really felt like 9 inch wide wheels would be about perfect for this car. And so I went on and looked, and I found a set that had a similar spoke pattern to my rear wheels, but they're not identical, and they're only 9 inches wide. And they were available from a place called AmericanMuscle.com. And they have a whole bunch of wheels up there. A lot of them are just pure knockoffs of different, manufacturer wheels. These wheels are slightly different, but they are still satin finish. They're 9 inches wide, and they're called DG23 replica satin wheels. And I will put a link in the description below so you can see exactly what wheels I got from AmericanMuscle.com. But I ordered those wheels, they came in, and I got the Pirelli PZero tires, and I can tell that they're different. If you go and look at them right next to each other, the front and the rear wheels, you can see that the satin finish is a little different, and that, of course, the spoke pattern is a little different. But unless they're not right next to each other, you can't tell. Like, this much distance between them, most people aren't even noticing. I can't really notice unless I really look. And what I do like is that the 9 inch width does have a better look with this kind of drag oriented car. It's a little narrower than the standard narrow body 9.5 inch wide wheel. I think it looks great on this car. So the carbon fiber wheels, got one here, are safely stored away. I will have them on call when I do my first track day, but otherwise they will not be on the car. Let's talk for a second though about how this car drives with these new wheels and tires on it. It drives great. But then again, it drove great with these drag radials on it too, and the carbon fiber wheels. It drives like every LX platform car that's been made on this platform since 2005, which is great. We all know this is a heavily modified, heavily evolved E-Class platform for Mercedes-Benz in the 1990s, and it still feels fabulous when you drive it. It's why these cars continue to sell so well, because they drive so well, because they still spring from a great platform that even in 2023 and 24 feels competent and capable and competitive with other cars that you would drive and get brand new right now. But I did want that spur of the moment ability to get in the car and drive it whenever I want to and not worry about rain and not stress about where I'm parking it because I've got $10,000 a corner wheels sitting on it. So this makes the car much more functional on a regular basis. Get in the car, spur of the moment, go and do whatever you want to do, not have to stress about it. So I love it because, again, if you're not trying to break quarter-mile records and launch the front end off the ground and you just want to drive around in your Dodge Challenger, guess what? The Demon 170 is really good for that too. One thing you probably would have guessed is that without the drag radials on it, it's completely a joke in terms of traction. So the car's fun and easy to drive, but if you get remotely aggressive on the throttle, the rear tires are just lighting up until the traction control reels them in. And it's interesting because I think about the people who disable stability control on these cars, whether it was the 2018 Demon or this one with an extra 200 horsepower. I never disabled the traction and stability control on the street with my 2018 Demon, and I would certainly not do it in this car. So you just drive around knowing that you're not really going to be able to exercise the engine remotely what it's capable of as long as you have traction and stability control on. And that's better than turning those off and, dying. So I just leave it on and don't worry about it. Speaking of driving, let's talk braking. I'm just about to hit 1,000 miles, but the first 500 miles, I was Mr. Self-Control. I, again, as I said earlier, tend to be a little OCD when it comes to breaking an engine in. I'm constantly varying the throttle and varying the RPM. How an engine lives its life for its first 500 miles is essentially how it will best live its life forever after. And there's people who don't do very smart things. They get a brand new car and they're like, hey, let's go break it in. They get on the freeway and they drive it 500 miles as quickly as possible. And if you drive a car for the first 500 miles at 60 miles an hour and 3,200 RPM, you know what you've done? You've created a car and an engine that is really good at going 60 miles an hour at 3,200 RPM. And it's terrible at everything else because that's all it did during its first 500 miles. And if you do what I did and you vary the throttle and you vary the RPM and you slowly but surely increase the aggressiveness that you drive it at, and you try to do pulls. When I say pull, what I mean is whether you're 0 miles per hour or relatively low, less than 20, 30 miles an hour, and you just roll into the throttle and you let it go up to whatever RPM you're allowed to go to at that point in time. If it was 3,500 for the first 100 miles and then 4,500 for the next 200 miles, whatever it is, you accelerate up to the RPM you're allowed to, sort of aggressively, and then you let it shift, and then you accelerate until, that's the best way to break in an engine. Because what have you done for its first 500 miles? You've taught it to constantly be kind of making acceleration and horsepower, which is what you want an engine to do. Ultimately, you want an engine's best capability to be accelerating somewhere between part and full throttle. And so that's what I did with this car. And it's funny because I've had, I have this fantasy that you get a car and you want to break it in ultimately, and you go to some like deserted, 20-mile freeway straight that nobody's on. And you just accelerate from 0 up to 70 miles an hour, shifting where you're allowed to the first 100 miles. And after you've gone up to that 70, you coast down or you hit the brakes, it's because you're bedding in the brakes too, down to like 0. And then you do it again, down to 0. And you do it again, up to 70, down to 0. And every time you're going, a little more aggressively as you get past your little odometer limits that allow you to go higher in the RPM. And what you've done is you've spent 500 miles constantly accelerating, varying the throttle, and shifting the car where you're allowed to more and more aggressively until you're flooring it up to 70 miles an hour. That's completely bonkers and no one should ever do that. But my OCD brain thinks like that when I think about how to break in a car the best possible way. So I don't do that because it's impossible, but I get as close to that as I can. So that's what I did for the first 500 miles, and the car seems great. At this point, you would have no idea. You could have totally broken it in wrong, and at 940 miles like I'm at right now, you would have no idea versus someone who was OCD like me and did it right. Where you would know is if you could go to a dynometer and get another Demon 170 that was broken in wrong and maybe see which one's making the most peak power after 500, 600, 900 miles. Or you would wait 50,000 miles and see which one's burning the most oil, or just idling the best and just generally running the best. That's when that shows up. So if you break it in wrong, you'll have no knowledge. Ignorance is bliss. I like to have the confidence that I did break it in right, and that whether I go and do a horsepower run on a dynometer or I go to 50,000 miles, the engine's going to reflect how well I broke it in. Obviously, I'm glad I don't think this car is going to be burning any oil at 50,000 plus miles, but let's switch to a far more interesting elixir that this car loves, and that's alcohol, particularly corn alcohol. And I was able to put some of that stuff in when I first got the car that I had in a container that I'd already had in my garage. But It took me a couple tankfuls to find using a app that has ethanol finder on it. And I've now found local gas stations that sell E85. And I've been putting it in here since probably around 400 miles. And the most magical or cool or special element of this car is that not only is it a flex fuel vehicle that can run on ethanol, but that you don't have to deal with anything except just put the ethanol in when you get it. You don't have to get the little sensor and the little tester and make sure it's mixed. Just put in ethanol. And whether you put in 10% ethanol or 90% ethanol, the car figures it out and makes as much power as it possibly can. And the first time I put in E85 at a gas station, I put on the horsepower display in the central touchscreen, and I watched it within a matter of 5 minutes of leaving the station shoot up from 900 horsepower to 1,025 horsepower. And then there was the little blue indicator right in the main gauge cluster that said like E70. And that tank wasn't 100% E85 because it had some gas when I put it in, but the next time I filled up, and I was almost out of fuel, I put in E85 again, and then it said E80 instead of E70, and it again made full power. So I'm pretty impressed because you may know this, but when you go to a gas station that says E85, it doesn't necessarily have E85. It can have anywhere from 51% to 90% ethanol. And a lot of times it's barely over 50%. But this station I've been going to has been reading, according to the Demon's sensors, somewhere between 70 and 80%. And that's more than enough to give it full 1,025 horsepower, according to everything on board. So I'm pretty happy that it's making that kind of power, and again, I'm doing no work except to buy the fuel, which, by the way, you may also know, is far cheaper than regular gas. I'm paying like $3.29 a gallon, which, trust me, if you don't live in California, that's cheap fuel. That's probably what everyone else is paying in all the other 49 states. But the way it's taxed here, everyone's paying $5+, except me. I'm paying $3.29 to make the most power. One of the coolest aspects of owning this car. That covers pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in this ownership video. The next video is going to be all about the extras that you get when you buy a Demon 170, because there's a whole lot of extras. If you remember the 2018, you got the Demon crate. Well, this time around, you get all sorts of crazy stuff, from decanters that are alcohol themed because of the car's engine and drivetrain technology, to crazy carbon fiber rear seat deletes. In fact, just a couple days ago, a big truck showed up with a big crate, bigger than the Demon crate from 2018, and it had the rear seat carbon fiber delete kit in it. And now it's sitting back here behind this car, taking up too much of my garage space. So I'm gonna have to like break it out and shoot the video as I free it from its crate, and then talk about what we're gonna do with that thing. But we'll put that in the next video. And that's everything I wanted to cover for this one. So look for the next one. It's going to be a long video because there's a lot to go over when it comes to all the extras. And not just the extras you officially get when you buy this car. I've got t-shirts, I've got a whole bunch of crazy extra Demon stuff that I'm going to show in the next video. All the kind of fun lifestyle accessories you can get with this car. We'll talk to you then.